When my son was a toddler, I used to love playfully messing with his head a little bit. You know, like pulling quarters out of his ear, because that's what fathers do. Anyway, one of the games I used to play with him was to stick my hand in my shirt and make him think that I lost my right arm. And today, I want to suggest that the enemy has done something similar to us as a church. He's made us think that we've lost our right arm. And today, I want you to know that the right arm is not lost. It's just been covered up a bit. And we just need to get inspired to start using it again. And that right arm that we're looking for as a church is our health message and medical missionary work. In our previous video, we looked at Adventist success in 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic, and I'm sure that perhaps some have thought that, well, that was then and this is now. Those were the old days. What happened in 1918 is not relevant in 2020 and beyond. Basically, some are thinking we don't need our right arm anymore. Well, I can assure you that God's methods are always valid, and His promise is that the efficacy of obedience does not wane over time. Now, I want to be clear. When it comes to our health message, nothing is 100% guaranteed in a sinful world. But as you're about to see, the numbers speak for themselves. I think that most of us have heard it over and over again. It goes a little something like this. This has become a pandemic of the unvaccinated. This statement is usually based on articles like this one. 94% of Alabamians hospitalized with COVID-19 not fully vaccinated. And this one, fully vaccinated adults 65 and older are 94% less likely to be hospitalized with COVID-19. If you've seen some of our previous videos like vaccines and variants, or our sermon, How Adventists Should Respond to COVID-19, then you know that I am absolutely obsessed with the number 94. And this is why. In the summer of 2020, months before there was even a vaccine, most of us saw dozens of articles that said that 94% of people that died from COVID had pre-existing conditions or comorbidities, like diabetes and heart disease. And this is what COVID-19 is feeding off of. So, I have a question for you. If that same 94% number was recognized in August of 2020, where was the cry that this is a pandemic of the unhealthy? Well, you didn't hear that. This is what you heard on the news about saving lives by reversing lifestyle diseases. And this is where you and I come in. God wants us to fill that void when people are either unwillingly or willingly ignorant of the fact that from the beginning of the pandemic, the health-demic of pre-existing conditions is what drove the majority of serious COVID-19 outcomes. And as a church, our voice needs to be heard. Our right arm needs to be used. The video you're about to see is Health-demic, episode number 2. If you're blessed by the video, then remember that these videos are meant to be shared. So please, share this video with other Adventists because we all need to understand the task that God has given us to use the health message as an entering wedge to reach people with the gospel and to point them to Jesus Christ. And if you want to share Health-demic Part 2 with people of other faiths and non-faiths, then the link to the non-Adventist version on our Valid Reason channel is in the description below. And once again, if you're here for at least your second video, then come on, it's time to stop running from commitment and subscribe to get updates on future videos in this and other series that we have planned. And now, let's take a look at Health-demic episode 2 to see if we can find that right arm that we've all been looking for. Welcome back. I know you probably came to hear about health. But before we get into all of the COVID-19 and health talk, I want to introduce you to someone who was very important to me when I was a kid. Actually, most of you probably know who he is. This is Mr. Miyagi. When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time breaking out the popcorn and watching and rewatching The Karate Kid. Part 1 was set in California, and Part 2 was set in Okinawa, Japan. That might have been the first time that I heard about Okinawa, but it would not be the last. Besides being the places where the Karate Kid movies take place, California and Okinawa have another major thing in common. Both of these places are locations for very special areas called blue zones. If you don't know, blue zones are the 5 places in the world where, generally speaking, on average, people live longer and healthier than everyone else. In a 2005 issue of National Geographic, it says, residents of these places produce a high rate of centenarians, suffer a fraction of the diseases that commonly kill people in other parts of the developed world, and enjoy more years of good health. And that statement is key to the discussion about COVID-19. They suffer a fraction of the diseases that commonly kill people in other parts of the developed world. While we were producing the first episode of this series, a report came from the CDC that was released discussing the death rates related to COVID-19.
The number that is now increasingly coming under scrutiny is how many people have died from the disease. The CDC is now saying only 6% of COVID deaths were due to the coronavirus alone. Why is this significant?
New tonight, data from the CDC shows just 6% of COVID-19 related fatalities in the U.S. listed the virus as the sole cause of death.
So that means 94% of people who have died with COVID had other contributing factors.
But a statistic released by the Centers for Disease Control states 6% of deaths were caused by only COVID-19.
The 6% of patients who died of the coronavirus exclusively, meaning that they didn't have any other comorbid conditions. Most people haven't filled out a death certificate. So when you do, you list a cause of death and then you list other causes of death, things like hypertension, respiratory failure, COPD, diabetes. And so what the CDC did was they really manipulated the data to say that there were 6% of patients that had no comorbid conditions, no other contributing factors.
And this, of course, has sparked confusion and misinformation.
Just because the death certificate has COVID and obesity and hypertension and diabetes doesn't mean they didn't die of COVID. They died of COVID, they just had these risk factors for an adverse outcome from COVID.
It only spent about 2 days in the coronavirus news cycle, but if you were to ask me, it should be in the news cycle for the next 2 years. All you need to do is go to Google, after you finish this video of course, and type in 94% COVID-19, and you will find dozens of articles that say the same thing. 94% of COVID deaths happen to people with pre-existing conditions. Now, before we move forward, I want to be very clear on what this means. You should know by now that everything related to coronavirus has become very polarized and politicized, from whether or not we should wear masks to how quickly a vaccine will be made. And for this 94% report from the CDC, it was no different. Some are trying to say that these numbers show that no one really died from coronavirus and that the disease is just a hoax. That is not what this means. And others are trying to say that all these deaths were only because of coronavirus. Well, that's not what the numbers mean either. What this 94% report simply means is that people with pre-existing conditions have compromised immune systems that places them at greater risk for COVID-related complications and/or deaths. The fact of the matter is that if you are a relatively healthy person, the chances that you will have serious issues if you are infected with COVID are very low. And therein lies one of the major COVID problems. And the problem is that most of us are not healthy. COVID-19 has exposed an issue that we've been sweeping under the rug. Besides coronavirus, we have a health-demic that we need to deal with, which is the plague of diabetes, heart disease, and so many other lifestyle diseases that have been taking lives for far too long. It is very likely that one of the major reasons that the United States is leading the world in COVID-related deaths has to do with this health-demic. And this definitely is not just my opinion. This is Dr. Anthony Fauci. Since 1984, he has served as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and he has been the face of the COVID-19 response in the United States. In a recent interview with Oscar Award winner Matthew McConaughey, when asked about just letting everyone get infected to achieve herd immunity, Dr. Fauci had this to say about COVID-19 and the health issues in the United States.
All right. Another one for you. If everyone in the world actually contracts the disease, what happens to it? Does it go away on its own? What happens if everybody?
No. Well, if everyone contracted it, even with the relatively high percentage of people who are without symptoms, Matthew, a lot of people are going to die.
Yeah.
Because even though, and this is the big misperception that causes so much difficulty in messaging to young people, is that people who are elderly and people at any age who have an underlying condition, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, heart disease. If you look at the United States of America with our epidemic of obesity, as it were, with the number of people with hypertension, with the number of people with diabetes, if everyone got infected, the death toll would be enormous and totally unacceptable. And that's the reason why we are against saying, let it fly, let everybody get infected and we'll be fine. That's a bad idea.
And that's a reason, is that also a reason why particularly America, as America, we're saying that? Because we have such high rates in those susceptible people.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you look at just people who are obese with diabetes and hypertension, you're talking about, a substantial proportion of the population. Yeah.
If you didn't catch it, Dr. Fauci is basically saying that the health issues of Americans, including heart disease, diabetes, and obesity, is the perfect storm that would create a disaster if too many people got infected at once. So, what now? Besides masks and hand sanitizers, what is the solution to our current crisis? Well, I believe that the blue zones can provide an answer. In this article entitled COVID-19 in the Blue Zone, What's Helping Elders in Sardinia, Italy? It says, Italy has the third highest number of coronavirus infections after the United States and Spain. But its ancient isolated island of Sardinia, one of the world's 5 blue zones where people live the longest, healthiest lives, hasn't been devastated by the pandemic. It appears that some of the reasons blue zone Sardinians are able to live vitally into their 80s, 90s, and 100s may be helping them stave off COVID-19 and sustaining them during their country's lockdown. Let's slow down for 1 second. After all, the island is isolated, so that clearly may have helped. And the article also states that 50% of the people have a genetic mutation that is resistant to malaria, so that might have helped. However, at the same time, we can't ignore the health success of the people in this region. So here's the thing. What about you? If you're not from one of these areas, does this mean that you missed out on getting the good health genes? Are you destined to get diabetes or heart disease? I hope you didn't forget already, but there is a blue zone in the United States, and it's in Loma Linda, California. This blue zone is different from the other 4 because it's the only one that is not related to a specific ethnic group like the others, but rather there's a high concentration of Seventh-day Adventists who believe the same things about health and lifestyle. As I mentioned in the previous episode, this group was highlighted on the Oprah Winfrey Show. So let's roll the tape and see what they're all about.
So one of the things we're doing today is revealing the secrets of the blue zones. It's the places on our planet where people live longer and healthier lives. Blue zone number 3 is the only one in the United States. And where is it? Let's look at our map. It's Loma Linda, California. Check this out.
So here we are, your blue zone, Loma Linda. Loma Linda is located about 60 miles east of Los Angeles, and where you'll find the group of Americans who live the longest. It's also where you'll find 9,000 followers of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Adventists are Christian. Part of their core belief includes an emphasis on diet and health. No smoking, no drinking, no eating meat or processed foods.
How you doing? Hey, how good. I didn't expect to see you, Dan.
94-year-old Adventist Dr. Ellsworth Wareham can still be found in the operating room.
He still does open heart surgery. He's an amazing guy.
So I understand gratitude's another big part of it too. A lot of people there are very grateful.
Yeah, well, I think this ties back to their religion. You know, for 24 hours every week, no matter how stressed out, no matter where the kids need to be driven to, they stop everything. From Friday night until Saturday night, they focus on their God, their family, their community, and then hardwired right in the religion.
This is the Seventh-day Adventist.
Seventh-day Adventists, right.
Yeah.
And then they take nature hikes. And the important thing, it's routine. If you're not going to do it for a long time, don't even bother, because it's not going to impact your longevity. So belonging to the right community where these rituals happen every week, that is the secret for adding good years.
It should be clear by what we just saw that you don't have to have good genes to live a long, healthy life. The reality is that with the right lifestyle, you can actually overcome some bad genes and dramatically lower your risk for chronic diseases, which means that you could also lower your risk for serious complications related to coronavirus. So, let's get to the point. What are they doing in Loma Linda to stay relatively free from the effects of the health-demic? Well, here are the 8 things that the healthiest people in Loma Linda, California do to avoid chronic disease and live longer than everyone else in the United States. Some call it the 8 laws of health, and some refer to it as New START. New START stands for nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest, and trust in divine power. Now let's pause for 1 second. Not everyone believes in God, and I have to respect that. So for those of you who don't believe in a higher power, then you can think of number 8 as figuring out a way to properly manage stress. But for everyone else, New START has a nice ring to it, so we'll just stick with that acronym. This style of life is why Loma Lindian Adventists are living longer and healthier lives, free from many of the chronic diseases that are so widespread. And everything here is freely available to everyone because it's not based on location or genetics. As we move forward and get educated, we're going to be able to grade ourselves and see if we're passing the health test and lessening the risk that we will have serious effects should we get infected with COVID-19. We can give ourselves a better chance to not get gravely ill from this disease. Sometimes it just depends on if we're willing to start taking an ounce of prevention. We're also going to see if there is scientific evidence that this lifestyle and treatment plan actually works. In the next episode, we'll take a look at number 3 on this list, water, to find out why we should use water not just for basic health, but also as a treatment for lung-related issues. As weird as it looks, this picture right here is key to understanding what you should do if you find yourself in a position where you or someone you love cannot gain access to medical treatment if you experience COVID-related symptoms. And you'll find out that what they are doing here has a method to what looks like madness. Remember, you don't have to be from a blue zone like Okinawa or Loma Linda to be healthy. You just need to live like you're from one. Hope to see you again, and stay healthy.